So exactly 1 year ago, I picked up this red EVO shell, and now it is actually a running and driving EVO. So yeah, I'm super excited that this thing can move under its own power, and hopefully our timeline is still pretty good to get this car racing at some point this summer. But how did we get here? What were some of the delays? What did I need to work on? What did I learn? Well, first things first, the turbo here, this turbo that came with the car had some studs that were messed up on it. And man, these studs are such a pain to get out. We heated these things up. We could not get these loose. Had to bring it to a machine shop to have them milled out. And even then, they couldn't really easily put in new threads. So we're going to end up just doing a bolt and nut combo on the hot side of this turbo. So if I've learned anything here, it's really that I'm going to try to never separate the exhaust manifold from the turbo if I don't really need to, because that seems to be always a glutton for punishment there where things are going to break. But once we did have this hot side of the turbo back, I was able to put it back together, connect it to the cold side. Did have some issues with that as well because it really needed to get cleaned up and it just didn't want to sit flush all the way. I probably could have just tightened up this clamp all the way and it might have pulled it through the C-clamp that goes around. But it seemed like it was just kind of rubbing a little bit and wasn't fitting perfectly. So I spent quite a bit of time trying to clean up this area of the turbo. There's also a stud that kind of helps align this and lines it up right, and somehow that was broken on this turbo as well, so that kind of sucked, but I did my best to mark it so I could line it up appropriately. And again, I did this honestly like 5 or 6 times trying to get this cleaned up well enough where it would sit down all the way. So talk about unplanned things in this project that took way longer than I thought. Messing with this turbo was definitely one of them. Hopefully this turbo works well and works good. We'll still have to find out if that's the case. So now, very important here, setting the turbo preload. Now this wastegate actuator arm should not be able to just slide right on. You should need to give it some force. Basically, you're adding some preload. You're adding some tension to this wastegate flapper, so it's being held closed because you don't want that open. It's basically just like a big boost leak at that point. We're going to pull on this wastegate actuator arm and get that in place. I didn't really change it from where it was before. I just didn't turn anything. It should basically be set to the same amount as it was prior. In general, just make sure that there's some tension on that arm when you pull it in place to get it on your wastegate flapper. And then don't forget to put your cotter pin back in place. Let's play a little game. We'll play the spot the error game. What am I doing wrong here on my first attempt to put this turbo in place? I left the old oil drain line in place, which was kind of nice. It held up the turbo a little bit. Also made it a little bit of a pain at some points to get in. But yeah, I forgot to put the gasket in between the exhaust manifold and the turbo on this attempt. But what's nice about it is, now I filmed this from multiple angles. So this is the angle where, you wouldn't be able to see anything if my radiator was in place. But it's really nice to actually put your turbo in when you don't have a radiator in place. Gives you so much more room. And here you can see the bolt and nut combo that I got for these frontmost ones. Attempt number 2. Here's the gasket we need. Putting that gasket in place. Tightening up these bolts and nuts. I got some grade 8 nuts and bolts at my local hardware store that hopefully will work out all right here. And then the 2 bolts on the other side are actually some ARP bolts, some 12-headed ARP bolts on the other side. And of course, once your turbo is mounted up in place, we're just going to start putting on our coolant lines and our oil feed lines as well. So we're connecting those hoses for that. And we have a new gasket for the oil return line as well. Another piece that was not the easiest to get in place, but did manage to slide it in and get those bolts tightened up. And also another area where it's nice that the radiator's not there, so you can get a better view of everything. And this bolt that goes to the head, this banjo bolt has the 2 washers on it. This is for our oil feed line, so this is going to feed the oil to our turbo. And we're just getting those washers on either side of the bolt there, or I should say either side of the line, I guess. One side of the line and the other side of the line, and then we'll just tighten that up. As always with these things, I would recommend you get them started with your fingers first because you don't want to mess up the threads. So make sure you have it lined up appropriately, which can also be an issue with these lines because they can get bent pretty easily. So make sure you get that oil feed line lined up correctly, and also make sure you have the right one. I believe you're going to need an EVO 9 oil feed line for the EVO 9 turbo, or you just might have to bend the heck out of an EVO 8 line if you want to get that one to work. So once you have all the oil feed lines, when you have the oil feed line, the oil return line, the coolant feed line, and the coolant return line, once you have those all mounted up, we're going to move on to the exhaust side here and get our downpipe in place. We have these exhaust hangers. I'm going to slide those on. And of course, this is the O2 eliminator downpipe, so I don't have an O2 housing. It's kind of built into this piece with the external dump here. Another really important part, if you're using an external dump, be it the downward or the upward one, is using a gasket that actually is divided into two portions. Because if it's not, like here, I have one that's divided and one that's not. If it's not the divided one, you're basically going to have an exhaust leak kind of the whole time. Your car's just going to be a lot louder because you're going to get exhaust flowing right out that external dump all the time, even when you're not at full boost. So now I'm just going to probably repeat myself a lot, but it's really nice that the radiator is not in place for multiple reasons. One, it makes this a lot easier to get to, and two, you guys can actually see what the heck I'm doing. So that's good. I remember putting this downpipe in the silver car initially after I was just swapping out the exhaust. Like the car was already, and I was just putting this downpipe in, and it was a bit of a pain to get to, especially one of the nuts I'm going to show you in a second. It's just, I think I only did 4 out of the 5 bolts when I put it on the silver car. I didn't even bother with one of the nuts because you have to kind of get it, you have to plan appropriately and get that nut on and then kind of slide it on a little bit more. It's a part of a poor design of this O2 eliminator downpipe setup, but I got it to work this time, and if it worked last time with just 4 out of 5, this time having 5 out of 5 should work just as well. So here you go. This is the shot, the one that's closest to the block here. You can see it's really kind of pinched off in there by the exhaust itself. So for one, it's hard to get that nut on in the first place, and then two, it's hard to even tighten that sucker up because you need like a really tiny wrench basically to get in there, and that's about all you can do. So now we got our electronic boost controller. We're going to move that over from our old turbo and put it into our new one. There is a mounting spot for that electronic boost controller and where it kind of plugs in to your factory harness. I will say I ended up moving that. I did bolt it to the side of my frame where it's supposed to bolt in, but it ended up interfering with my upper intercooler pipe eventually. So just letting you know, I moved that later on. Depending on your intercooler pipe setup, you might be able to just use this factory location here and bolt it on and plug it in. And now our final motor mount, transmission mount, can get put in place. So we're going to bolt this bracket right to the transmission here. And of course, we'll tighten that up. And then the lower front center member, cross member, whatever it's called, we're going to bolt that up in place. I usually like to hang it up by that motor mount part first and then get the bolts all started. One in the rear that goes to your front subframe, and then the 2 in the front that go basically to your lower radiator support. So we got that in place, tighten up all the bolts and nuts. And then I probably have a lot more I could tell you about the brakes, but I'm going to do a detailed brake video later. But the good news is I bled them enough where I could have someone hold the brake pedal, and then I could tighten up these CV nuts. I wanted to do that before I forgot, and the brakes worked well enough for that, so that's great. So I could tighten those up. I torqued them to whatever torque specs are supposed to be, 120 some foot-pounds or something. So obviously I waited as long as I could before I had to put the radiator in, but now we're to the point where we're putting our aftermarket radiator in, and with that it came with a SPAL fan, this radiator did, so we're gonna have to wire that up. And the good news is you should be able to, if you want to make it plug and play, you should just be able to cut the harness of your OEM fan and splice it into the new wires of your SPAL fan, and that way you can use your fan control module. Pretty simple connection. You know, there's I think a black wire and a blue wire, so I just connected the black to black, blue to blue, and then it should plug right in. But if you watched my fuel pump install video at all, you know I talked a lot about connecting wire connections and whether or not you want to use solder and how you actually want to do it. So if you want to do more research online about actually doing this yourself, I would just recommend doing that. But if you really care exactly what I did for this one, all I really did was strip both of the wires, just give them a solid twist connection, and then I used some heat shrink to hold them together. I decided I didn't want to use any solder on these connections. The lower mounts for the radiator, got some brand new OEM ones here, so I was like, why not go ahead and put those in right away? They obviously just get cracked and corroded over time, so we're going to pound out this old one that was also kind of stuck in place, and then just pop in our new one. Again, certainly something you probably don't need to do, but one of those, while you're in there, spend all that extra money. It's really not that expensive an item, honestly. So now we're going to drop our radiator in place. You may have noticed, just a funny side story, that this isn't the brand new one I made a video about, because I found out I kind of forgot that this came with the car when I bought the red shell. It came with the exact radiator that I bought brand new, so go figure, my bad. I didn't pay enough attention to that. So I'm like, if this one's good enough, it worked, it looked good, I'm going to go ahead and reuse the one that came with the car, because it is the setup I wanted, where it's for the 4, 5, and 6 EVO, where the top connection point is moved over away from the manifold and closer to the driver's side of the car. So of course, dropped in that radiator and then got our top mounting brackets in place to hold the radiator in place as well. You may notice a little editing magic here on some of this stuff. I did some things in different orders based on when I could get to them, but I'm gonna try to display it to you in what makes the most sense. So here's the lower radiator hose being put in place. And then of course our upper radiator hose we're gonna put in place as well. I put this one in the wrong way initially. I ended up flipping it over. I'll show you that in a second. We got our coolant overflow on the passenger side of the car. We're going to mount that up in place and connect the hose to that. And then our OEM fan control module here. Here's a larger plug-in that comes from the harness, and then the other end goes to your fan. So then you plug in that fan. So now our aftermarket fan is just a plug and play. So that's really nice. But now we do need to find a place for this module to get mounted up. So I kind of played around and looked for a couple different spots, but what I ended up doing is there is a hole or a mounting point, I should say, in the bottom portion of the radiator. It got a little closer to the lower intercooler pipe than I would have liked, but it did work for now. I might change the position of it later, but for now, that's what we got. So it is tested in and working, so that's what matters at this point. Speaking of testing, yeah, I did take the upper intercooler pipe and realized how close it got to this hose. It was honestly the wrong way, so I ended up flipping the hose around so the bent outward portion would bend out towards the exhaust manifold, which of course you wouldn't think you'd really want, but honestly, if it was set up the other way, it would get even closer. If this was the OEM 7, 8, and 9 radiator, that radiator hose would basically run right up over the exhaust manifold. So another test fit, it looked a lot better. So now we can start putting this in place, this upper intercooler pipe. This is an engine style, I believe, upper intercooler pipe, but it was just like repainted or something. So it looks a little bit nicer. It's not really the best intercooler piping setup I've worked with, but it functions, it works okay. And honestly, I feel like a lot of these just never fit super well. And I had some fitment issues with this one too. Again, mostly it turned out to be because the lower intercooler pipe, or I should say it's the lower portion of the upper intercooler pipe, kept kind of hitting on that electronic boost controller and where that wanted to mount up. Also running the engine intake, and that requires, at least this one required me to have this other piece of rubber that I put around the turbo so it kind of seals, so I can make sure it seals a bit better. So I put this other extra piece of rubber around the inlet of the turbo, and then I put another coupler over that one. I also made more adjustments to the upper radiator hose as far as having clearance kind of for that air intake as well. I just ended up tipping it upward a little bit to give me a bit more room, which I may not have had to do because this whole setup ended up being up higher. The air intake obviously has a portion where it connects the blow-off valve, and that was set up to connect to that upper intercooler pipe, the lower portion of it. And somehow everything was just sitting a bit high, again, I think because of that boost control solenoid. And a quick reminder to always check for these valve cover caps and stuff. They always end up cracking and getting crappy over a couple of years, so be ready to swap those out all the time. This one's not really a big deal. If it's sucking in a little bit of extra air on that air intake, it doesn't matter a whole lot, but I did swap that cap out for one that wasn't cracked. So a second attempt at getting my intake mounted in place worked out a lot better once I moved stuff around to get that intercooler piping kind of in a better position. Plugged in my mass airflow sensor, of course. tighten up all the clamps. And here you can kind of just see how everything was ran. I'm not a huge fan of the upper intercooler pipe being so close to that radiator hose, but that kind of ends up happening no matter what you do here. I might try to finagle it around to get a little bit more space in there eventually. But here you can also see I found a different mounting spot for that Grimspeed boost controller, so hopefully that seems like a good mounting spot here where I could just screw it in place. Now we get to have some fun mounting up our intercooler, brand intercooler. Yeah, just kidding. I just liked having some fun with this car, so I started naming things with what they actually were. So my brakes just say brakes. My intercooler just says intercooler. I have a coil rad, kind of funny coil rad one that just says radiator. And I even got a wheels one with the Enki symbol. So I thought it was a little fun to be a little creative and just kind of make my own stuff, make fun of brands while also using the actual brands, and just kind of making my own car. Making a little character, I guess, actually for the car, and just have it be, those non-brand name brand name things. And the intercooler stencil thing, I had to make my own little stencil out of cardboard and stuff. It didn't turn out super great. I think it could have turned out better. But I did have to like Photoshop an ETS like logo to intercooler, and I had to Photoshop the spinny turbo blade from an E to an I, and then obviously make it a lot longer and smaller to make it fit. But it was kind of fun to do it. We did a test fit on this earlier, but the OEM front bumper crash bar does fit over this pretty large intercooler, so that's great. So we got to put that in place and mount that up as well. Same thing as I mentioned before, and it especially seems to be valuable thing to do here with stuff like this bumper is make sure you get all 4 bolts started before you tighten them up, even more than like halfway, because some of these bolts can be a bit tricky to kind of get started if the holes won't quite line up quite right if you try to tighten one before getting all the other ones started. And now the lower intercooler pipe, of course, we're going to get that set up in place as well. I ended up swapping out the coupler that was on that side of the intercooler. You may have noticed when I first put the intercooler on, it had one of the stock OEM couplers that kind of has a bend to it. Had to change that to a straight coupler here for this intercooler pipe. But we'll get that lower intercooler pipe in place and mount it up. And finally, fluids, the magic of editing again. I checked the fluid, or I added the power steering fluid quite a while ago, but it just makes sense to clump this all together. Check the engine oil fluid. That was a little bit low because of course I swapped the turbo, so I added a little bit of engine oil. I added actually honestly a lot of fluid for power steering, and it was still kind of whiny and making noise. So I'm gonna have to check that again too. And basically you got to work air through, the air's got to kind of work through everything that I added fluid to, because everything was so like bone dry. So the power steering kind of need to work the air through. Coolant, of course, you want to get any air bubbles out of your coolant system, and that's what we're doing next here. I'm showing you adding some coolant to the radiator, of course, filling that up. But then brake lines, I did a lot of bleeding on the brake lines as well. I was able to gravity bleed pretty much everything and make it work okay. I did have to pump the pedal a lot initially to kind of get fluid up to the ABS module. But after that, I just kind of cracked the bleeders and let it bleed out the air. And it's still spongy, needs to find a final bleeding, probably a final manual bleeding with someone else, pressing the pedal. But I was just trying to work this by myself, and I was kind of happy that, considering how bone dry the brake system was, I was able to bleed everything out just kind of with a gravity bleed. So after we check all of our fluids, one final step here is actually going to be our battery and getting all our battery stuff set up. And honestly, I'm working on a whole separate video about this. I'm going to do a very detailed video about changing everything on the battery and just cleaning it up and kind of how the connection should look. And I did this on my black car. I just haven't, my black EVO, I just haven't finished the video yet, because I'm also learning a bit on the way as well. So what I've learned is that what I already installed now was the positive terminal, the positive connection where it connects to the top post. You can buy that one brand new. So I got a brand new OEM one for that. But what I've come to learn, and maybe someone in the comments could help me out, but I can't find a brand new OEM one for the negative terminal. And if you're not familiar, the negative terminal is generally smaller than the positive terminal. So if you buy a connection that's for a positive terminal, you usually end up like cranking and tightening the crap out of it for the negative terminal, because that one's so much smaller. So I think you possibly could have. I could have bought two of the positive terminal ones and used, one for the positive, one for the negative. It just might have been extra cranked down, but I didn't really want to do that. So I ended up going to my local auto parts store and getting a regular one. But I'm getting ahead of myself here because right now what I'm actually doing is connecting the negative terminal to the chassis. There's a part of the negative wire that connects to the chassis, which is good and bad. It's good because obviously it just is a connection point that's right there. What's bad about it is then it makes your negative lead wire like super short and kind of a pain to work with sometimes when it's got another connection point right there. And this connection was a little messed up. I noticed it should have been bent, and it wasn't, and was re-drilled for like a different connection point. But it all should work fine. I'm not really 100% sure how OEM cable would specifically look, but from what I gathered, I thought it was going to have like more of a 90-degree bend in it. So that's what I'm doing with this one. I'm just bending it down, so it's going to basically give me more length to this cable. I do like having a positive battery cover here, the positive cable. So we got that brand new OEM cover, which will honestly only kind of really fit with this OEM, or at least a shorter length connector, the part that clamps to the battery. If you buy just an aftermarket one, like from an auto parts store, it's probably going to be too long, and then you won't be able to put this cover on, honestly, to cover it up. But again, I'm going to make a super detailed video on all this. What I did end up doing is buying a positive and negative set connection from a auto parts store, and then I just used the negative one from that and bolted that on. And so far so good. That did seem to work correctly. We picked ourselves up a brand new battery. We got that installed, set it in place, connected our terminals, and then of course we have to mount it down with this battery tie down, hold down. And that was it. That was the last step. And now I'm going to show you exactly how it went to go ahead and start the car. But I'm going to tell you first that I also unplugged the crank position sensor to crank it over, because I just wanted the car to crank over to make sure I ran some oil to the turbo and anywhere else before it would actually fire right up, because I didn't want it to fire up just right away. So once I let it crank a little bit, I just went ahead and plugged in that crank position sensor, plugged that back in. So now it should fire up on its own. And this is it. This is literally the first start. This is actually the first start of the EVO. So what's actually really exciting for me about this one is this is the first time I kind of really did this myself in some ways. When I had the black EVO and I built that one, I didn't get to start it up before I sent it over to Andy's shop. It's just the way things played out. I brought it over to Andy and he kind of buttoned things up, and then was the first one to actually start that car up. And similarly with the silver EVO, it happened that way as well, where he was I was there for it and everything, and we put the engine together and dropped it in and we did it together. But I didn't really get to do it myself that time either, because Andy was helping me finish it up. So that's what's cool about this one. This is actually the one that I feel like I've did pretty much everything by myself, and it started up, and there's such an awesome feeling. Like if you've never worked on a project car before, and then like that to that point, to that extent where you drop in an engine or something and then have it fire up, like it's just a really cool feeling. But now you can see there's obviously I used some anti-seize and any type of oil and any stuff that's going to be like on your exhaust manifold. Is once it's getting hot for the first time, you're going to have a little bit of smoke. So what I gathered so far, everything seems okay. I'm hoping there's no excess smoke from the turbo. Again, the condition of this turbo is really unknown, so the turbo itself could give me issues. I'm not really sure yet. I drove this car up and down the road a little bit. I got it in the third gear, and that's about as far as I got. I'm not really hitting boost yet because I want to get this thing tuned and make sure everything's fine before I ever really get into much boost. And I still have to actually get my boost gauge working to make sure I'm not like over boosting it or anything. If you watch this whole series, you know that fixing the power steering was actually a big issue with this whole car. That's part of the whole reason I eventually was like, all right, it's time to part out the silver car, because the power steering line erupted on that thing. So this power steering rack is the one that came with the car, but I had to swap it into the other lower subframe, and just a whole bunch of messing around. So I had to add quite a bit of fluid. It seems like I kind of kept working the air through that power steering. I kept moving it all the way. I did it all the way to the left, turned it all the way to the right, did a little bit of work with that to get it, and it does seem fine now, but it takes a while. You know, it just takes a while to run things through. And man, I had this car jacked up so high that I had to actually like take it down in phases. I actually probably should have just took the front of the car down before the rear, because I had these really large, like 5-ton jack stands in the front. But yeah, you know, eventually got to lower the car down so you can drive it. But it is drivable, a running, driving EVO. Next steps is definitely just to button up the interior. I need to get my boost gauge working. I need to try to get my heater control working. The heater fan motor isn't blowing. Not sure why. I got to figure that out. I got to get the radiator to work. And again, my boost slash air to fuel ratio, I need to get those gauges to work. I need to bolt on the exhaust. I need to double check all the fluids underneath. I'm going to recheck the trans fluid and the transfer case fluid, make sure those are topped off. I have a busher, full busher exhaust, so this car is going to match my black one as far as exhaust. It's going to be pretty much the same exhaust as what's on my black EVO. And I have a double pump fuel pump setup coming that I'll need to get installed as well before I bring it to the dyno. But that's kind of the short list. It's getting really close to me just taking this over to ASM and saying, hey, needs a front end alignment and needs a tune and whatever else they might find you know, while they're doing that. But those are the main things I'm going to bring it over to Andy for. Hopefully he can squeeze me in at some point. I'm sure it's going to be tricky this time of year, but it'll be very interesting. I can't wait to see what this car can put down for dyno numbers, especially compared to my black EVO now, considering I've kind of upgraded the intercooler and I'll have like kind of a matching fuel system setup now as well. So because of this turbo, it should have more power than my black EVO, at least when my black EVO is not running nitrous. So this is cool. It's getting to the fun stage. Thank you guys for tagging along and watching. I really appreciate everyone, you know, following along with this build. It's been a lot of fun. Of course, it's not over yet. There's a lot of things to tweak and fine tune. And I always appreciate your comments. If you think I did something wrong, could have did something better, or you just want to leave a comment to help out the video algorithm, please feel free to leave a comment in the comment section down below. But as always, this is Paul from Boosted Films saying thanks so much for watching. I just want to say that domestic violence is never okay. If you or someone you know is experiencing issues with a partner and doesn't feel safe, please visit the website thehotline.org or call 1-800-799-SAFE.